So what I'm focusing on is the importance of Black male representation in education, because often we don't see it. That's a big issue. I've seen it firsthand, and it's very necessary for sure. One thing I like to throw out all the time, and it's not just a hashtag to me, is representation actually matters. We have to be able to see the things that we aspire to be, and have solid imagery for our young ones, especially. Definitely talking about our young Black males. And as Frederick Douglass mentions here, it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. In many cases, when we get to adulthood, as far as Black males go, we see that things, the system, the education system, schooling, all those things, life has really, beaten us down. And at that point, it's very difficult to repair those issues. But if we start young, I believe thoroughly that we can definitely make those changes happen. I wanted to draw a parallel here, just thinking about these ideals, because they live throughout in a historical context, but also, thinking into the future as well. So, I mean, considering if anybody is familiar with this gentleman right here, the idea that his hip hop album, rap album, would win a Pulitzer Prize is what we're talking about. We want to get there, but at the same time, we're going to do it in our way. And we understand that we essentially shape culture, and having that in mind, it's really important to take the time to think about what we're ingesting and also what we're putting out into the world. So considering that in what people are seeing and what they're assuming from you, but also take things with a grain of salt, which I'll get to in just a moment. I want to actually jump into the meat of what I'm talking about by telling you 3 different stories. These stories are all true, and they're all related directly to me. So the first one talks about impact. I ended up in education. I did not begin in education. I did not study education in school. I actually took a track into becoming a chemist, which I did for a year. I started out, grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I went to Pittsburgh Public Schools, and by the time I got to middle school is when I had the first true, I think, influential impact as far as education is concerned, outside of my parents, my mother being really deep into education and instilling that in me before her untimely passing at 33 when I was 10 years old. But my middle school science teacher, a Black man by the name of Mr. Preston, really opened things up for me. With science, it was always an interest of mine, but I just didn't really see the way through, didn't really know how to navigate it or how to approach it. And he really made that real for me. And then going into high school, I had another teacher, Mr. Bynum, in 10th grade, chemistry teacher. And at that point, when I stepped into his classroom, I said, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to study in college, and this is the career path I'm going to take. So from those instances, those are the kind of the pathways, or the stepping stones, if you will, to get me to a point of realization. However, I don't know that I would have had that same feeling, that same notion, had those gentlemen, those brothers, not been there in that role, because it made a difference. I can't, thank them enough to this day. And funny thing, my first year teaching, which you're seeing an image of outside of my classroom here, I taught 3rd grade in Southeast DC. My first year teaching was Mr. Preston's last year. He was actually exiting out that summer as I was coming in, and he, served for 31 years. So just considering that idea and the impact and the influence that you can have and not even know. So you never know. You never know what the lasting impact is going to be. So, keep that in mind as you go through. And then also, just to play on some of the context here, with 3rd grade, many of us, I'm sure we're aware of, the school to prison pipeline, where 3rd grade is an integral year. So I did not take this task lightly going into it. I understood what it was. Anybody going into elementary school, really take heed and pay attention. The second story is a tale of two schools. One school located in what they would call an urban area where it's essentially a food desert. There aren't many grocery stores, things like that. And at the same time, the housing project where many of the residents live are being pushed out. The school itself has struggled for years. There's always excess of district representation walking through the building, making sure things are up to code, so on and so forth. Test scores are not what one would like them to be. There's a lot of culture there. There's a lot of appreciation for each other, for family, but those things are often overshadowed because the school's quote unquote performance is not there. Another school, opposite side of town, more affluent for sure. They have an abundance of resources. The school does well. It probably has the highest scores in the district and essentially gets accolades continuously, has a very active PTO, and continues to thrive in the midst of this. These two schools essentially are night and day, right? Yin and yang, two opposite sides of the spectrum. These are the two schools that I worked in. The disparity between the two schools within the same district, to me, really heightened my senses and made me understand how important and how detrimental it is. But at the same time, the representation of the Black male educator was essentially the same, right? The role did not necessarily change as much. You, for whatever reason, are still seen as, a disciplinarian or, just one kind of cog in the grand scheme of things. So no matter what, the common denominator still is the influence and the focus on the student, right, on the children, because regardless of anything, there are going to be those young men in particular and the young women who are going to need that push, that guidance, right? So as in the first school, I had students struggling with all kinds of different things, even though the entire population was Black. At the second school, there were still Black students there who were in a different world, right, in a different environment, surrounded by people who did not necessarily always look like them, and they had to navigate that too. And and I did as well. There's some interesting parallels there, but the disparity, regardless, it still lives and exists because the Black students are either way kind of pinpointed as not proficient, not exceeding expectations. Last story. Just when you thought it was safe, when I became an administrator, we would have a summer leadership institute. I attended the institute. Clearly, I was there for a particular reason. I had the T-shirt on and everything. Another teacher from another school, or another leader rather, and mind you, a parent from the second school that I worked at, jokingly mentioned to me that she was like, "Oh, hey, are you the PE teacher?" As I was standing directly next to the principal, who was roughly a 70-ish year old white man, and then my counterpart, who was the reading coach, who was an Asian American woman. So at first, it rubbed me the wrong way, of course, and I was like, "Wait a minute," and I knew that it was confirmed because she came back to me after the fact and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it in any type of way." But there again, no matter where you get to, right, you can be the principal of a school. At the end of the day, humility is key. Just consider everything that you have been through, everything that you've seen, and don't forget any of it because somebody's going to remind you. And essentially what we're doing here is we're talking about legacy building, right? We're talking about creating system, structure, content, whatever representation that our young ones are going to see and they're going to expound upon and continue to take and just run with it. As you can see here, this is an image of myself and my son. So I hope that what I'm doing now is something that I think would reach him so that if and when he makes it into either public school system or we decide to homeschool or whatever it is, regardless, the impact that I saw early on at least touches him at some point and allows him to grow and flourish into what I really believe that he could be.